Want to say good morning, good afternoon, or good night regarding whatever time you're listening to this podcast. Welcome to the Apply Rigor podcast, where we try to serve up a fresh dose of encouragement to you, regardless of whether you're on the peak or in the valley. Hey, before we go any further, Dave Jones.
Good
How are you?
morning.
You doing all right? Good morning. Dave just decided to say good morning, so I'm going to let you guess what time of day it is. It may be the afternoon. He's kind of tricky. How are you doing today?
I'm awesome. I'm abundantly blessed and walk in the favor of God.
Good. I wanted to make sure. Yeah, I wanted to make sure we didn't fast forward past that.
Yep. Doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome, man. I'm doing awesome. I just came off of a peak experience yesterday of coaching a middle school soccer team that beat its biggest rival at the first win after 3 years, coming back from a huge deficit, winning in overtime. And I couldn't help but keep thinking, but we're doing the podcast tomorrow, and we kind of talk about this stuff every single week. So I am very in tune and ready to rock.
Let's do it.
So, hey, guys, I'm so excited today. We have a good friend of mine who I worked with for a few years, many years ago, and have stayed in contact with. His name is David Friedson. And I want to tell you a little bit about Dave as we get going today. Currently, he's the VP of Operations for Orr Safety over in Louisville, Kentucky. He's a former member of the Army, and he is a self-proclaimed adrenaline junkie with nearly 25 years of experience in environments from manufacturing and distribution to providing services in logistics and technology. He brings a unique combination of team development and leadership, operations strategy, and thought leadership with the ability to implement and execute. He's worked for companies, just if you're wondering, I'm going to let you know, he's worked for companies like UPS, Chiquita Fresh Express, Archway Cookies, and Evergreen Packaging. And so today, again, like I said, he's with Orr Safety in Louisville. And we can't miss this. This is the most important part. He's married to his beautiful wife, Debbie, and has 4 children, 7 grandchildren, loves to travel, and usually does so to support his skiing and running addiction. He's an ultra marathoner. So those of you that are wondering, yes, he will run for fun 50 miles at a rip. So, hey, wow. Dave, welcome to the show, man.
Well, thanks so much. It's great to be here this morning.
You know, as we're talking about the Apply Rigor podcast, peaks and valleys every week, bringing on spectacular guests from around the world. Dave, we just want to really get into your story here. And if you could talk about, your highest peak and your lowest valley. And let's just start off with, your biggest peak that you've experienced over your career.
Yeah, well, aside from, you mentioned my family, my wife, my kids, my grandchildren. Of course, that's always the focus. That's always the peak for me. My peaks come from some of those adrenaline things that I do. It just drives me and thrills me. And I bring that into business as well. So I kind of feel like every achievement, just being where I am today, right now, is a peak for me. But peaks for me are somewhat fleeting because I'm always looking at, now that I'm here, what comes next.
That's good. Well, being content is an important thing. But also knowing when to stop being content to keep pushing is important too. And so, I appreciate that, knowing, when I've seen you and watched you race in 40-degree weather with driving rain, in mud, through forests and trees and everything else to make it is pretty incredible.
And I think, in the end, it really thrills me, but also it's conditioning in life. It also, creates just this level of tolerance that we have to accommodate so many other things by challenging myself. It makes so many other things trivial in the end. Wow. So, yeah.
Well, hey, talk to us about your lowest low. Then talk to us about a valley that you've been in the past.
Well, I'll give you a couple of different circumstances, and both seem on the surface very different, but each of them entirely challenged both my mental and physical endurance, and pushed my tolerance for stress to new levels. So the first one was way back, unfortunately, too many years ago when I was in the Army, and I remember this evening. It was 40 degrees out. Funny you mentioned that with ultra running, but this was a night when it was 40 degrees out and raining all night. Had that 110, 120 pound pack on my back. We only had about 15 miles to go that night, but it was through the mud, and every step of the way, it added, another 5, 10, 15 pounds on each foot. And you couldn't shake it off because your very next step, you were sinking again into, a foot of mud and collecting that again. And, by the end of the evening, it was about 4 in the morning. I was so tired, so exhausted that I just laid down where we were in a puddle and shivered the rest of the night.
Wow.
I know hypothermic. It was a miserable evening. There was another guy who experienced something similar, and he kind of tapped out, so to speak. And I just kind of saw the scorn that he went through. So it was one of those things. The morning broke. I suffered through it, and 3 days later, we were back in Garrison, and I had still had a fever of 103 at that time. So I know I was pretty bad off. But in the end, there were a lot of other people around me that it was one step after another. I knew I wasn't gonna die out there. I knew that the people around me would take care of me if I failed. So I kept plodding through.
When you were in that valley and you're shivering and life is horrible, what emotion do you think you went to that was negative, but what was the emotion that was positive that you went to that said, you know what, I'm going to get out of this? What do you think it was?
The negative, of course, was just the absolute misery. Wondering how I'm just going to get through that. The next, it's not even thinking hours ahead. It's thinking about the next minute and surviving that, because it's just so darn miserable. And the motivation to get through, of course, is it's just not going to end here. I'm not gonna lay down and die. I'm going to do what it takes just to keep going, because then you do start thinking about, well, am I going to be around tomorrow? Well, of course I'm going to be around tomorrow. I'm going to do whatever it takes to do that. So it's just that kind of thought process, I think, that I went through then, and in other valleys as well.
Wow. So yeah, so talk to us. I know I think you had another one you wanted to share as well. Why don't you share with us real quickly about that one too?
Yeah, well, far more recently, in my first vice presidency role, it was in 2008, and the company I was with at the time just went into a hard bankruptcy. I mean, this was we were open for business one day, the next day, a couple thousand people were just out of work, no pay, no benefits. And again, as I said, this was in 2008. And I was unemployed at that time for 53 weeks. Mm-hmm. So it was it's definitely a difficult time. At that time, I already had a family. So, certainly that valley was thinking about, wow, what does the future hold? Not just for myself, but for loved ones around me.
So go ahead, Dave.
I was gonna say that sounds bad, right? It probably was, but when you're talking about the valley of misery of shivering in a puddle and a valley of like, not being employed, what was were the same emotions that got you there, or that you're in, were the same emotions that got you out? Walk us through that.
Essentially, yes. The big difference is, and both are just such a test of your endurance, of your capability to tolerate stress, and what your attitude is when you're in that valley. I think the big difference was simply my maturity and what I had learned over the years and my experiences. In the latter one, that really helped me to get out far more smoothly.
Dave, one of the things I love about both of these stories, and you just talked about maturity, is, Dave Jones and I have talked about this idea of being a slave to your emotions, mm-hmm. or having high EQ and being able to control your emotions. And when I hear you say that, that's what I hear, is that through your maturity, you're able then to lead your emotions versus letting your emotions lead you and being a slave to them.
Well, I absolutely, and I think it really comes down for me to two things. One is, in that latter example, I've always believed in, I definitely want to save for the future, but I also want to do things today as well. And being able to look back and say that I'm there's not a whole lot of things that I can say I wish I would have done. There are regrets I have, but it's not a matter of thinking I wish I would have done these 5 things. I don't have a bucket list because I make the bucket list happen all the time, and I'm always looking for the new thing. Well, when you're in the valley, what that does is it really lets you focus on what's in front of you instead of thinking back and wallowing in a misery and feeling sorry for yourself. Because you've already done. I've already done so many of the things I've dreamed of doing. Now it's just a matter of, climbing back out. My focus can be purely there. I think the other thing in that I have learned is that I operate within a band of stress, and if when things are going really well and relatively at low stress, I found that in the end, I'll start manufacturing stress out of little things because that lower bound is just there. And I'm going to have, this level of stress no matter what. And at the higher end, and in both the valleys, it really tests that upper level of stress. And, when you reach that level, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to break, and so few people really break, or you're going to adapt and do something differently, and change your life, your luck, your fate, your destiny, whatever that is. And I also believe that you can condition yourself to change where that upper and lower band are, and I think that's actually how it ties back to those activities that I love, that adrenaline stuff that I love to do with the extreme skiing and extreme running. I'm constantly putting myself in that, testing that level of stress and ultimately raising that band. And that leads to being able to escape out of those valleys.
I think there's so much more to talk about in that stress tolerance and the band of stress. It sounds like a book right there. As we land the plane here, what encouragement can you offer those entrepreneurs in the middle of the valley? Like, what would you say to somebody who's in the valley, who's listening to this right now or watching this on Facebook? What would you say to them?
I think the magic blessing for me is always knowing that I'll never look back and wish I would have. And you can fill in the blank with what the would have is for you. My take, there's always time to sleep later. Make it happen now while you can.
That's really good. That's really good. I think as we wrap up here and we get ready to kind of shut down this episode, if you're listening, don't miss what he said just a couple of seconds ago.
Yeah. That
if you don't have enough stress in your life, like if you're trying to live a stress-free life, you'll ultimately manufacture it, whether it's an completely, overemphasizing or getting upset at the tiniest things. But if you have too much stress, it will help drive you to the bigger rocks, to the bigger things to do that. And you've got to figure out where that band is for you and how you manage that.
I love the idea of, when you're in the valley, also, if you're watching or listening, is taking care of what's in front of you right now.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Instead of thinking about 2 years from now or 6 months from now, that's great advice, Dave. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dave, you've been a great friend over the years. And I echo Dave Jones right now. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for being on.
Much appreciated. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome. So, hey, as we get ready to wrap up this episode, again, take these ideas, take these lessons, and incorporate them.